Thank you, everyone, for joining this REV-UP session, and thank you to Jennifer Geary for hosting us. Um, Last year, we focused a lot on all kind of communication skills, etc., and now we want to get into a few more of our compliance, regulatory risk skills and needs. And so I'm super excited to have Jen here. She's got so much experience, over 25 years, and she's worked across such a diverse range of different areas, from not-for-profit, actually having been the Chief Operating Officer for Save the Children for many years, which was a huge NGO, and serves across so many countries, and obviously does incredibly important work, saving children every
Risky
year.
work, Kimberly.
Very
Risky work.
risky. But then, of course, she worked at Barclays, where she was for many years, I think 13 years, as chief of staff. Um, and she's, just got such a great span of being COO, of being CRO, and of now, of course, developing all of these series of books and training courses. So I am super excited um, to have her host today. And I hope you will really enjoy it, and make sure you sign up for more REV-UP sessions, listen to the podcast, come along to our events of Risky Women events, and sign up for the Raw newsletter so that you actually make sure that you're notified about everything. But Jen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, and good morning. If it's your morning, good evening, Heidi in Australia. I'm just going to spotlight myself. Just give me 1 second, just so that we can. I'm just struggling to use my cursor at the moment. Hang on a second, Kimberly. There we go. I'm just going to do that. Right, there we go. And Kimberly, if I can ask you to monitor the chat for me, that would be wonderful. So. Welcome to a taster session, really, for the how to be a CRO course. You're here, I'm guessing, because you are interested potentially in a risk career, or you're in a risk career, maybe in sort of mid or senior level management, maybe eyeing that first CRO role. Or wondering what it's like to step into a C-suite role, frankly, in any discipline, but particularly in the risk space. And I'm hoping what you'll get from today is some insights into what it's like to step into that role, what some of the foundations are that you need to lay as a chief risk officer, an overview of some of the risks. We won't get through them all in an hour. I'm afraid there's probably 3 to 4 hours of content in my course, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to vote on a couple of areas so that you can get the ones that you find the most useful. Then we will look at things like how to build your team and some other kind of success factors at the end. So that's what we're going to get through in just a little under an hour. Kimberly, do I need to spotlight myself? I think at the moment I've got you. Let me see. I probably need to do it. Give me a second.
I can see everyone across the top. So
can you? Okay, fine. I can just see your lovely face. So, oh, actually, you probably, do you know what? I'm going to hide myself altogether. There we go. And then that won't distract anybody. Hopefully that's okay. Okay, so just very briefly, Kimberly's given me a lovely introduction, so I certainly won't linger on this too much. My name's Jennifer Geary. I started out my career as a chartered accountant in Dublin, but I also, as well as the financial audit, I did some technology risk studies as well. So I used to, for example, audit the systems that prepared financial statements and things like that. Since then, I moved to New York after that, and then to London, and I've had over 25 years experience, as Kimberly said, in banking, places like Barclays, Santander, in not-for-profit, Save the Children, and as my first CRO role, where I was Chief Risk Officer and held the SMF4 function, was in a fintech called Asto, which was created by Santander. And that was a great case study because we were owned by Santander, so our risk standards had to meet Santander's standards, but we also had to make them agile enough for a new fintech, for, you know, a new startup to be able to navigate, and kind of distilling 270 of Santander's policies into 30 that were fit for a startup was a really interesting exercise. So I'll try and bring some of that insight as I come and speak today. And if you have particular interest, please just drop questions in the chat if there's something in particular you want to know. And Kimberly, feel free, if there's something relevant and topical, just like interrupt me and I'll answer, or else we'll leave time for a bit of Q&A at the end, okay? So as Kimberly said, I've been a chief operating officer, chief risk officer. I've been a managing director, so I've held a revenue line as well. And I'm currently a non-exec director, as well as doing a lot of authoring and speaking and advising. I have written 5 business books, including How to Be a Chief Risk Officer. So that's this book that the course is based on. I'm actually, as part of the course relaunch, I'm actually updating the book and producing the Audible as well. So in the next couple of weeks, there will be an updated book, Audible and course available via my website. So if this is a particular interest to you, you know, keep an eye out on that and sign up to my newsletter. And I need to update this. It says over 30,000 happy customers. I'm really pleased to say it's now almost at 40,000 happy customers. And people write to me and say thank you that my books have helped them in their career, which is absolutely lovely. So how I've structured this course, I've given you a little bit of a flavor already. Module 1 is all about the foundations, where I talk a bit about the CRO role itself. Then I talk about 3 fundamental pillars: culture, strategy, and execution. And all of my C-suite books start with those 3 pillars. Then I go through the risks, and I kind of, in the full course, I take you through a pyramid of risks, starting with strategic risk at the very top, and then moving down through people risk, technical risk, financial risk, operational risk, and finally sustainability risk. And as I say, I'm going to give you an opportunity to maybe vote on which of those you'd like to hear a little bit more about in the interest of time. Once we've identified all the risks, well, we've got to do something about them, right? So what we do is we create a control strategy, or we look at some of the other treatments of risk that we need to be able to deploy. And actually, control is only one of 5 different treatments that you can apply to a risk that is outside of your risk appetite. We look at governance and oversight and the importance of that, how decisions are made, who's overseeing, what data they get to help make decisions. Then I will talk, again, in the full course, I talk about information systems and data models, obviously increasingly important in the world of AI. And then finally, some sometimes overlooked key success factors, things like being strategic about how you build your risk team and the capabilities and skills that you build up around you, going from good to great. That's one of my favorite areas to talk about. And also how you maintain your focus and keep your head up and keep looking forward and around corners to see where the next risk is coming from, rather than just dealing with what happened last month or what's happening now. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit briefly about the CRO role and some of the fundamental pillars. So if you're stepping into a C-suite, any C-suite role for the first time, it is really important that you prepare. And anytime I've stepped into a big role for the first time, I've actually, as far as possible, tried to take myself away, like to go away for a couple of days, you know, stay in a hotel, maybe treat myself, bring all of my like review materials, notebooks, really intentionally plan for how I'm going to make this role a success. And that involves obviously mental preparation. So all your reading, all your research, maybe if you can get previous, you know, risk committee papers, you know, strategic documents, industry analysis, as much as you can to do your background research, and time for you to plan and to think about what your early challenges are going to be and what you want to achieve. I also say it's time for us to prepare physically. So to think about, you know, get those doctor's appointments done, get those dentist appointments done, deal with all those little nagging issues before you step into your first C-suite role, because it is highly challenging and you want to feel organized and you want to have a calm home family life with everything organized so that you can be really, really focused. And think about things like your gym routines and, you know, how you're going to keep yourself fit and healthy and balanced as you step into a big demanding new role. This is an ideal time, of course, to plan your first 100 days, what it is that you want to achieve as a CRO in those first 3 months or so. And actually, it might sound counterintuitive, but I think it's a really important time to think about your legacy. So to think about, if I step into this role and I'm here for 5 years, you know, at the end of that, how do I want to leave it? Like, what would an amazing legacy in this role look like? It's very important when aspiring to senior roles to be really self-aware of yourself, your tendencies, your preferences, the things you like doing, the things you don't like doing, and to be sure that, this role is something that you really want and that it's going to match up to you and your personality type. And, here I talk about some characteristics I've seen of some really effective CROs, and some of them are kind of really obvious. Obviously, integrity to your very core are incredibly important. But maybe less obvious and sometimes less common are characteristics such as being highly collaborative with your peers around the C-suite table, with different departments, with your board, and so on. Commercially astute, knowing how your organization makes money and where the risks are that contribute to that. And solution focused, so not just someone who raises problems and says, oh, these are all the things that could go wrong if we launch in this market, but actually one that says, this could happen, so let's think about some mitigants for that particular risk. You definitely need to be tenacious and brave. I have had to be sometimes the sole person in the room who put their hand up and said, I'm sorry, I know you all want to launch tomorrow, but I don't think we're ready. So it's not always a role for someone who needs to be liked or popular. I mean, obviously that shouldn't happen if things work better. But sometimes you do have to be that brave person, and you have to be able to stand up and speak truth to power and say when something is the way that it is. Diplomacy and skill in relationship building. I'll talk a second about the new set of relationships that the CRO needs to build. People management, and ideally, I think if you can show, if not a sense of humor, at least some humanity in your work, show that you care, show that you're invested in the success of the organization, show that you're human. In my experience, that builds you a lot of friends around the table. Conversely, and this list is not mine, this came from Risk Management Magazine, there's a list here of, when you might not enjoy the CRO role. And if some of these characteristics, I mean, look, we all have some of them, so don't be overly down on yourself. This isn't a negative thing, but we all know our tendencies, right? And some of these tendencies that I show here just can set you back and can hinder you as a CRO. So this is not to say, like, don't become a CRO if you lack confidence. No, forget that. But what I'm saying is, if these are some of your tendencies, recognize that they are not all that helpful to you as a CRO, and start thinking about some of your coping mechanisms when the inevitable happens and when you're under pressure. I love this slide. So usually, when you get to be a CRO, when you step into that first C-suite level, you probably got there because you were really, really good at what you did, right? You could have been an excellent risk manager, risk director, head of, and you get tapped on the shoulder and it's your turn and it's time to become a chief risk officer. Well, the irony of that is that all of a sudden you have this whole new peer group, and obviously not every organization has all of these roles, but pick and choose and tailor to your organization. But each one of these people around the table has a completely different agenda to you. They define success differently. Their brains probably work differently. They may well be different personality types. And things that you hold to be true in terms of, like, well, everybody thinks, nobody wants, risks to happen and that kind of thing. They will be thinking about success and upsides and downsides very differently from you. And that old adage of what got you here won't get you there. You have to cultivate relationships with a whole new set of people who do not have risk as their central focus, yet at least. And success at this level means cultivating relationships here with different people and forging a shared view of what success looks like, which incorporates their views of success and yours, and hopefully you can come up with a shared vision. And finally, as you do this preparation and as you think about it, bear in mind that one CRO does not fit all. Different organizations will need different things from their CRO, depending on things like whether they're early hypergrowth, a hypergrowth SaaS company, or whether they're a mature manufacturing company or a highly regulated pharma company. So the stage of the life cycle, the nature of the business and the industry that they're in, the type of regulation that you're subject to, your stakeholders, so what your investors are looking for, are there milestones, are there expectations to get to a certain level, and of course the culture of the organization, which we'll talk about as well. So you need to think about not just, who you are and what makes you good at what you do, but what does the organization need from you in order for this to be a success? Now, this is a time to get out your phones, please. And if you can scan this QR code, and if it doesn't work, don't panic. I'll give you another way to access the survey. But what I'm just going to ask, and I'm not sure, Kimberly, how many people we have on now, but I want to take a very quick poll as to what people would like to hear about for the remainder of the presentation. So if you've got the QR code, great. If not, I'm going to navigate to a different screen, which will also allow you in. Let me see. Right. Okay. This is the survey that we want. Now, if you didn't manage to scan the QR code, if you go to www.menti.com and enter this code. Oh, well done, everyone. It looks like people have already got in there. So I would like to hear from you about what you would like to know more about so I can tailor the remainder of the presentation. Just give people a minute or two. Okay, I see, oh, I was about to say I see winners here. Looks like strategy. Strategy, execution, good choice, one of my favorite topics. And sustainability looked like the top three. So I'm going to focus on those for the remainder of the presentation. Oh, that's it. Oh, let me see if I can go back. There we go. Okay, any more for any more? Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to, obviously the whole course goes through all of this, but we will focus on strategy, execution, and sustainability. Love it. Thank you for your input, people. Okay, I'm going to skip over culture for the reasons that we've said, but the long story, the TLDR about culture is I believe every new executive in role needs to start with an understanding of your organization's culture. It can either help you and be like the wind in your sails and boost everything that you do, or it can hold you back. And you need to do some diagnosis of your organization's culture and either try and work within it or see if you can positively influence it, because it's either a thing that helps you or a thing that will hold you back. Strategy. Excellent, excellent choice. So it is amazing to me how many chief risk officers sort of launch in and create their cookie cutter risk framework, the same one that they created in the previous organization, without taking account of the reality of the organization that they're in now. And I believe that you cannot create an appropriate risk framework without fusing it with your organization's strategy. Strategy is, after all, well, depending on the definitions, but where the organization wants to get to and how it's going to get to it. I'm a big fan of Max McEwen, who wrote the strategy book, and he talks about where are we now, where do we want to get to, how are we going to get there, and what are the measures that will tell us we're going in the right direction. And and the fifth question, which obviously links strategy and risk completely, is what are the things that could knock us off course or help us along the way, also known as strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, whichever way you decide to look at it. But so in order to create a relevant strategy risk framework, you've got to look at the organization's strategy. So have a look at some of these statements. These are not risk statements. These are business statements made by real life organizations today, and you may recognize some of them. So move fast and break things. That was Facebook very early on. The idea was, let's go as fast as we can. If we make some mistakes, that's fine. We'll fix them and we'll move on. But just think about what that says in terms of risk appetite. There's a high tolerance in there for certain risks to actually occur. And actually for Facebook, the greatest risk was not moving fast enough. We're in business to save our home planet. That's actually Patagonia's statement. And Patagonia is one of the most admired companies in terms of sustainability. In fact, they have turned themselves into a trust whereby all of their profits just go back into causes to help the planet. And, you know, that says something about their goals and, you know, their view of risk. Their view is the greatest risk is the damage that we're doing to our planet, and everything that they do is in furtherance of that. The next one, to serve as a trusted partner to our clients by responsibly providing financial services that enable growth and economic progress. That's a bank. That happens to be Citibank. And again, you can you get the conservatism, you get the risk aversion in the statement. Our purpose is to make sustainable living commonplace. That's Unilever. Screw it, let's do it. That's Richard Branson at Virgin. And the low fares airline is Ryanair, which tells you about its priorities and the fact that it's prepared to take some risks to customer experience and, you know, what people say about them and that kind of thing in furtherance of being a low fares airline. So just these few examples hopefully illustrate for you how risk appetite and strategy are absolutely fused, joined at the hip. And one of the great and interesting things that you get to do as a CRO is to interrogate those different levers and pushes and pulls of strategy so that you can craft the right risk framework. And this is, if you take nothing else away from this, risk management, this is risky women, right? Risk management is not about taking zero risk. And I think we forget that sometimes. And, you know, the less effective risk managers and CROs among us just point out all the issues and problems with everything and try and get risk to a minimum. Risk is about knowing what risks you're prepared to take and aligning your operations with that view. If you work in risk, you will be familiar with these kind of impact likelihood matrices. So when you start thinking about the risks that can impact your organization, we talk about, you know, impact if it happens, likelihood of it happening, and that like top right red zone is the one where it's likely to happen and it would be highly impactful on your organization. The main point, though, that I want to make here is that often we just focus on financial loss. So, you know, well, how much could we lose and so on. And it's really important when setting risk appetite, when thinking about the organization's strategy and setting the right risk appetite around it, that you also think about other elements of risk, such as damage to your organizational brand and reputation, and business disruption as well. How long could we be out of business, and what would that mean for us along the way? So a reminder, as you're looking at strategy and risk appetite, to look at different elements of it and really tease out with your board and with your senior management committee how much they're prepared to take on board. This is a real bugbear of mine in risk management. People love to say zero tolerance. It sounds great, doesn't it? Zero tolerance, zero tolerance. We would want none of the risk in this space and so on. There are times when zero tolerance is appropriate, right? So, for example, money laundering. Well, fraud actually arguable, but you know there are certain things where it comes to the law, where it comes to regulation, where it comes to safety, where absolutely you have zero or as close to zero tolerance as you can possibly have. But think about for a second what zero tolerance means in some other contexts. Zero tolerance in cyber risk would mean let's unplug everything from the internet, right? Zero tolerance in credit risk means we never write a loan. Zero tolerance in market risk means we don't operate in any currencies other than our own. We never take out a loan. We never invest, right? A lot of the time, it is not realistic and it is not affordable to have zero tolerance. You don't want to do it anyway. It's not what you want to spend your organization's time on. And I think if you want to be a powerful stakeholder in engaging with your board, you need to sometimes hold up the mirror and shed maybe some perception that people have of sort of comfort where they can just sit back and go, well, we've no tolerance for this. It's like, no, there is risk here. All business has risk. All business ventures have risk. Now let's talk about where we want to intentionally take risk and where we want to bring it with an appetite or try to eliminate it along the way. And a great exercise is to think about in which areas for your organization zero tolerance is valid, and actually where do you just have to say, look, this is part of doing business. Now let's control it as best as we can. I've got some kind of bonus prompts and things like that go with the course, but I include here some questions that allow you as a CRO to really interrogate strategy and risk appetite when you're looking at it in your organization. And that takes me to the end of strategy. Now, Kimberly, I think I did see a chat question pop up. I'll draw breath at this point. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask me?
No, it was just Heidi saying that she's run out of battery, but she's going to rejoin when she gets home.
Okay, fair enough. Sorry about that, Heidi. We've got this recorded anyway, right, Kimberly? So we can talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so hopefully I've kind of brought together for you the intersection between risk and strategy. And apart from anything else, it just makes your job so much more interesting as a chief risk officer, and it makes you come across as someone who's invested and interested in the business of the organization and its success. Now, the next one on your list, I think this was the highest scoring one, is execution. So what do we mean by execution? Well, it's all too common that, and it's not just in risk, it's in other areas as well, where, a senior executive comes in, they do all their analysis and research and study, they talk and interview everyone, and they present their plan. And in the case of the CRO, it's usually like their risk framework. And nothing changes. Right. So, what happens is everyone go, oh, yeah, lovely, great presentation, very inspiring. And everybody goes on with their job just as they did before. And what's happened is a failure of execution. And when that happens, it's kind of like the clutch in the car hasn't engaged, right? You're revving, you're saying things, people are nodding and so on, but maybe the same risks are recurring, or action isn't changing, or people are making the wrong prioritization calls. And it's deeply frustrating as an executive, because you're like, well, I've done all this work and I thought I was clear, and what are people not getting about this? And the truth is, the reason this happens is there's organizational inertia. There are, programs and pet projects that have been underway for a long time. There are habits that need to be broken. And so to be effective, you really need to crack the skill of execution. So in this lesson, I talk about the risk framework and how you actually embed it in the organization so that it makes a difference. I look at ways to actually diagnose whether or not execution is happening and what you can do about it. And I talk about areas like projects and change and new product launch and the role of risk in that space. So this is an overview of the risk framework. If you want a really good book on all these elements of the risk framework, I highly recommend a book by Elena Pykova, obviously after you read mine, that goes without saying. Elena Pykova, Pykhova, and she goes through these elements of the risk framework in a lot of detail. But these 8 elements are really, as you're thinking about how you operationalize your risk vision. So there's governance and oversight, there's how decisions are made. So this is your board meetings, your risk committees, agendas, roles and responsibilities, who has authority to say and do and take decisions, and so on. Then across the top, I'll go left to right, you've got risk appetite. So this is a key early action that you will take with your board, where you really interrogate what the risk appetite is for different risks across the spectrum, and going into areas like tolerances and limits, and how far can we go, and how much business can we write before we need to stop. And it's very important for setting limits, but actually the wonder of a well-set risk appetite and set of limits and tolerances is it actually gives your people freedom to operate within those boundaries. It says, go write as much business as you want up to these levels. Give us a warning when you're at this level, but other than that, just go and execute. And that is enormously enabling for an organization. Staff training and education. So obviously you've got to take your risk framework, you've got to educate people on why you have certain controls in place, why you're worried about something, what regulation is, what good looks like, what others are doing, and so on. And that's obviously an ongoing lifelong journey. Risk event reporting. So when something does go wrong, you need an infrastructure around how that gets reported, flagged, interrogated, and resolved. Risk assessments. So this is when we get our so-called first line of defense, or the business or the people who are, running the day-to-day operations of the organization, to self-assess themselves on the risks that they're most worried about and the controls that they have in place. And if their controls aren't fully up to scratch, the improvements that they're going to make. That's a key element for self-awareness and self-improvement in your frontline. Horizon scanning and scenario mapping. So this is looking up, looking out beyond your organization, across your industry and sector, and also into other industries and sectors, to think about what could come next and affect your organization. And at the moment, my goodness, we've got geopolitical risk, we've got economic challenges, we've got the advent of AI. There is never, well, I don't want to say there's never been a more turbulent time, but there is a lot going on at the moment. And some things that were very stable for a very long period of time are beginning to be challenged. And so it's never been more important as a CRO to get your head up and out and looking around. Then obviously there is the machinery of reporting, monitoring, KPIs or key risk indicators, identifying issues, reporting to your board, having dialogue, and so on. And then finally, that feedback loop that helps you become a constantly improving and learning organization. So as you think about all the different elements of your risk framework, these are the things that you need to see developing roots and getting embedded within the operations of your organization. How can you tell if your risk framework is happening or not? Well, here's a couple of warning signs that might indicate that more needs to be done. So a common one is misalignment between what's been said about risk appetite and actually what's happening on the ground. That for me is a real sign of a break from design to execution. Poor risk data quality, inconsistent reporting. So, you've said, you've agreed at all the senior levels and everything, this is what we're worried about. These are our tolerances. These are our limits. We won't go beyond them. And the reporting, the data is not good. You're flying blind, or the data is late. That's one that you often see, that, if you've got monthly reports, you're getting the backward looking view, 3 weeks into the next month. That's very, very hard to steer an organization when your data is late. If risk assessments are treated as kind of oh yeah, okay, it's that time of the year again, I know I have to do it, I know I have to eat my vegetables, but they don't actually do anything with the findings. So they've diagnosed gaps, but they haven't done anything about it, and frankly they're not that bothered about it. That strikes me that it's just sort of a tick box exercise rather than something that's actually informing the operations of organizations. Lack of risk ownership. If the first line is only thinking about sales, growth, business development, and they're not thinking about the upsides and downsides of doing things, that suggests to me that risk and that risk-aware culture hasn't embedded itself in the organization. A disconnect between risk processes and business planning. This is very common and a real bugbear of mine. I'm sure you've all sat in meetings where 50 minutes of the hour has been about like the real business of the organization, and then at the end someone goes, right, I suppose we better take a look at the risks, right? I hate that, and I always call it out when I see it. I don't want 10 minutes at the end of a meeting. I want the whole 60 minutes to include an evaluation of business decisions and the upside and downside risk. And if you can achieve that as a chief risk officer, you've done your organization a great service. Again, poor superficial risk discussions, zero tolerance, and other terms just bandied around, suggests to me not a very thoughtful board or risk committee. And when something goes wrong, limited consequences, right? So somebody breaches a rule, a mistake happens, and everyone just kind of shrugs their shoulders and moves on. They don't learn from it. There are no consequences. So if you're seeing this in your organization, this suggests to me a weakly executed risk framework, and that's when you need to take some action. It will come as no surprise to you that I am a believer in that when your organization is undertaking change projects, you don't involve your risk people the night before you launch, although it's surprisingly common. You actually get them involved at the very beginning. And if it's done at the end, it's a lose-lose for everybody. The risk team gets blindsided by something that's just about to happen, and they go, whoa, wait a second, I haven't had a chance to have a look. No, you can't go live tomorrow. I haven't seen it. Then the business says of the risk team, well, these guys are just blockers. They're just a department of no. They get in my way. They hold me back. And you've got this kind of vicious perpetuating circle. If you can involve your risk people at the very beginning, they get to challenge you know, the premise of what you're doing, you know, is it the right thing? Is it commercially viable? The design where you can build in controls organically at the very beginning. At Asto as CRO, we had the luxury of, I had my 2 customer services staff and my product team sitting side by side each other. So the customer service team got to hear and understand deeply the features of the product, but the product team got to hear some of the challenges that customer services were having in dealing with customers. And we got this brilliant virtuous circle of improvement and learning and design control and built in seamlessly rather than being inspected out later on. Same thing in development, testing, rollout and review. So strong change projects will involve your risk people early. Now, what that means, though, the responsibility on us as risk professionals is that we are constructive, right? We get invited to these meetings and we don't just throw up all the obstacles and the barriers and walk out of the room, but we're actually solution focused and helpful as well. And you want your frontline counterparts to be saying, actually, Jenny was really helpful in that meeting. She pointed out something that I hadn't thought about, but she came up with a solution as well. I'll invite her to the next one of those, right? That's what you're aiming for. And I include in the course, I won't go through these 8 steps here, but basically a sort of a checklist when you're launching a new product for risk considerations to think about all the way through from initial product concept to ongoing maintenance, review, and actually ultimately retirement of the product or service along the way. Right, that takes us to the end of execution. I'm doing very well for time. I'm very proud of myself. Just a word on the risk pyramid. So this is not something that you'll see anywhere except in my books and my courses. I really like it. What it aims to do is provide you with a sequential way to think about the different types of risk facing your organization. It's not saying necessarily that one risk is more important than the other, although I might make an exception for strategy at the top. It is just simply a logical sequence to think about risks. So I start at the top. I think about strategic risk. That is the risk that you have a badly designed strategy or a badly executed strategy. Then I start to think about people, all your people-related risks, everything from misconduct to failure to attract the right talent, to retention issues and so on. So everything in the people-related space. And I take a really broad view of people-related risks. Then you've got to think about your technology risks, confidentiality, integrity, availability, cyber risk, data privacy, AI, all of the areas in technology. Then I go through financial risk, everything from capital and liquidity. Have you got enough money to meet your debts as they fall due and also to meet your plans and your business pipeline? How exposed are you to customers and counterparties? What market risks, so foreign exchange, interest rates, and foreign exchange, interest rates, I've blanked on the third one. Oh, in investments, so, you know, how they're behaving as well. And then financial reporting risk, it's sometimes a little bit neglected, but the risks around inaccurate presentation of financial statements. And then finally, there's a whole slew of operations down at the bottom. So in total, I've got about 20 risks here, which I go through in the full body of the course. And I talk about what they are, and I talk about some common treatments of them. But based on your feedback, we're going to jump into a risk at the very bottom of the pyramid, and I don't include it in the diagram, but it is my last risk, which is sustainability. So let me just navigate to that one. So it's a really interesting time for sustainability. And if you're particularly interested in this, there is another book called How to be a Chief Sustainability Officer, which I have co-written with a lady called Anna Kratova, who is a deeply skilled CSO in her field. And we produced that last year. And obviously it's an interesting time for sustainability because you've got some changes in the US, changing views. You've got the US, it's actually taken itself out of the Sustainable Development Goals, and you would be forgiven as a sustainability professional for feeling under a degree of attack. That being said, the sustainability agenda, I think, is still holding strong in Europe and other parts of the world. And I think it's here to stay for most organizations. But sustainability risk is obviously, it links to some of the other risks in the pyramid. It links to everything from strategic risk to financial risk. For example, if you're an insurer, climate risk is huge for you. So there's a lot of different ways of thinking about sustainability in the organization. What do I mean when I talk about sustainability versus ESG? ESG is an investor lens that looks at the performance of organizations through the lens of environmental issues, and I've listed them here, social issues, and governance issues. Sustainability, we define to have a broader remit, and the way Anna defines it is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And sustainability in its broadest sense, if you have a product or service that is damaging, that is not aligning with the needs of the current and future generations, you face ultimately oblivion. And if you look at organizations, they pop up on my LinkedIn a lot. Philip Morris, for example, is working very, very hard to take cigarettes out of its product suite altogether. So it will shortly be an organization that does not have cigarettes in its business at all. So think about sustainability through that lens: sustainable profits, sustainable success, and that's the broadest possible definition that you can do. There is, of course, a ton of sustainability regulation, and I've just included a fraction of them here. And again, there's more in the book if you're interested. Particular ones to be aware of right now. So CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, this is in a really interesting space right now. The plan from the EU was it has been rolled out to the largest organizations, and then it was going to be progressively rolled out to medium and smaller sized organizations. Given everything going on politically, given the pushback in the US, given the burden of reporting that this is placing on organizations, the EU is relooking at its applicability right now and looking at slowing down the rollout of CSRD and its annex, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. So this is a very live and changing space. I did a podcast with Anna a little while back. I have a podcast, the C-Suite Framework podcast. It's available on Apple and Spotify. And in one of my podcasts, I interview Anna, and I think I'm going to have to interview her again, actually, because it's changing so quickly. But what Anna's talking about now is what are the no regrets activities that organizations should be taking anyway, whatever happens with the regulation. What data do you need to be tracking? What is materiality defined as for your organization? What are your impacts across the broadest possible spectrum? How are you impacting up and down your supply chain so that you can think about the impacts that you're having and then manage and mitigate them? And I loved this quote by the Risk Coalition. It says, "I would argue that a CRO is one of the few senior executives able to look across the breadth of ESG and sustainability issues and bring together cross-functional teams to address them." That's what we do, right? We're very, very good at seeing a risk coming and seeing the threat and pulling people together and doing something about it. And therefore, whether or not sustainability forms a part officially of your role description or not, sustainability risks are here. They impact, as I say, all the other elements of your organization, and failure to address them as CRO will leave you exposed down the line. So it's a really emergent space. I would love, just to give you an example of some of the links to other risks. So literally, sustainability may mean that some of your lines of business and some of your markets may become less viable. It means some of your products might become redundant or no longer attractive. It also means that there may be new lines of business and new areas of investment. Sustainability is opening up new revenue lines and new possibilities for organizations. If you are a lender, sustainability links to credit risk. So if there are natural disasters, think about what happened in LA. Think about the ability of those businesses to pay back their debts as they fall due. There's also financial reporting risk, all of that regulation to be complied with. And greenwashing risk, by the way, which I love to talk about, now comes with some very hefty financial fines if you're found guilty of greenwashing. And failure to insure against catastrophic events, for example. There's also operational and counterparty risks that impact in sustainability in this space. I include in the course a sustainability risk framework that talks through all these different areas along the way. I'm just conscious of time because I want to give people a chance to ask some questions. Oh yeah, and some greenwashing do's and don'ts. Lots of ridiculous things that organizations do. Don't be one of those organizations. It doesn't look good. It damages your reputation, and now it comes with fines along the way as well. So for the remainder of the course, and obviously I'm not going to get to it here, but we just talk about. I'll just bring back the outline. We go through controls, we go through governance, systems, building your team, going from good to great, and so on. It's been a real piece of work, to pull this course together. I feel like I've distilled everything that I know into it, and I hope the insights are useful. It's very, very practical. It's very real world. It's what it really feels like when you get into that. And I hope I've given you a little flavor of what it's like to be a CRO. If you are interested in the course, and if you would like to know more about it, or even just to hear from me very occasionally, because I don't post very often, if you would like to go to www.csuiteframework.com, in fact, /contact. You come to this page and there is a form to fill out. Just send me your details. And I've got a blog as well that I post on from time to time. And you can also find out about my podcast here. That is all that I was going to cover today. I hope that was useful. And we've got a couple of minutes for questions.
Shame we lost Heidi to her battery, but I thought that was really, really good, and so much stuff that can be applied just across multiple roles, I think, as well. I loved all of the preparation stuff, even at the beginning where you're talking about thinking about the legacy that you want to be, left with, which I think is really, really interesting. And the relationship map and several of the other things, and those risk strategy statements were fascinating too.
They're fun, aren't they? Yeah.
Thinking about it in that context is really interesting.
Very cool. Yeah, yeah. It makes your life much more interesting rather than just implementing a cookie cutter.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, obviously that's just such a scratching the surface of what you can go into, and obviously everyone can read the book. But yeah, any questions from anyone? We've